The empty ring box on my nightstand felt like a punch to the gut. My 3-carat princess-cut engagement ring, the one my husband Marcus had proposed with just 8 months ago on the beach in Santorini, was gone, and I knew exactly who had taken it. But let me back up, because what happened next involves my millionaire husband making one phone call that would destroy my sister-in-law's entire life, expose a web of lies that had been years in the making, and teach our family a lesson about consequences that none of us would ever forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Isabella Chen-Morrison, and 3 days ago I thought I was having the perfect Christmas with my new family. Now I'm sitting here realizing that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones willing to steal your most precious possessions while you're sleeping under the same roof. It was December 25th, 7:30 a.m. in our estate in Maplewood Heights, Connecticut. I'd woken up early, excited for our first Christmas as a married couple. Marcus and I had been married for only 4 months, and this was my first holiday hosting his entire family in our home. I wanted everything to be perfect. The night before, Christmas Eve, had been magical. Marcus's parents had flown in from Seattle. His brother David came up from New York City, and David's wife, my sister-in-law Vanessa, had arrived with their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, both 7 years old. The house was full of laughter, the smell of cinnamon and pine, and that warm feeling you get when family comes together for the holidays. I'd taken off my engagement ring before bed, as I always did, placing it carefully in the small Tiffany ring box on my nightstand. It was a habit I'd developed because the ring was so substantial, worth more than most people's cars, and I was terrified of losing it or damaging it while I slept. Marcus always teased me about being so careful with it, but he understood. This ring wasn't just jewelry to me, it represented the moment my entire life changed. When the man I'd loved for 3 years finally asked me to be his wife. The ring itself was extraordinary. Marcus had it custom designed by a jeweler in Manhattan, a 3-carat princess-cut diamond in a platinum setting with smaller diamonds cascading down the band. The center stone was flawless, certified, and absolutely breathtaking. When he'd proposed on that sunset beach in Greece, I'd literally gasped when I saw it. It was more beautiful than anything I'd ever imagined wearing. But it wasn't just the monetary value that made it precious. Marcus had told me he'd spent months working with the designer, incorporating elements that were meaningful to our relationship. The setting was inspired by the architecture of the hotel where we'd had our first vacation together. The smaller diamonds were arranged in a pattern that matched the constellation we'd wished on during our second date. Every detail had been thoughtfully chosen to represent our love story. So when I reached for the box that Christmas morning, planning to put the ring on before going downstairs to start breakfast for everyone, and found it completely empty, my heart stopped. I stared at the empty velvet interior for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My first thought was that I must have moved it somewhere else and forgotten. Maybe I'd put it in my jewelry armoire for extra security with guests in the house. I frantically searched through every compartment, every drawer, every possible place I might have stored it. Nothing. The panic started setting in as I realized that I distinctly remembered placing it in that exact box before bed. I could visualize myself doing it, the soft click of the box closing, the way I'd positioned it just so on my nightstand. There was no way I'd moved. Marcus was still asleep beside me, and I didn't want to wake him with my panic. Not on Christmas morning, not when his entire family was here. I tried to think rationally. Maybe the box had fallen and the ring had rolled somewhere. I got on my hands and knees and searched every inch of our bedroom floor, under the bed, behind the nightstand, in the bathroom. Still nothing. That's when the terrible realization started creeping in. The only people in our house besides Marcus and me were his family. His parents, Richard and Patricia Morrison, were staying in the guest suite on the first floor. They were both retired executives, wealthy in their own right, and had been nothing but kind and welcoming to me since I'd joined the family. The idea of them taking my ring was absurd. David and Vanessa were staying in the guest bedroom down the hall with the twins. David was Marcus's younger brother, a successful investment banker who lived in a penthouse in Manhattan. He had no reason to steal from us, But Vanessa had always been complicated. From the moment I'd met her 2 years ago, I'd sensed something off about her attitude toward me. She was beautiful. Tall, blonde, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged on magazine covers. But there was something cold about her. Something calculating in the way she watched people. She'd grown up poor in rural Ohio, something she'd mentioned multiple times during conversations, usually in the context of how lucky some people were to marry into money. The comments always felt pointed, directed at me, even though I'd never hidden the fact that I came from a middle-class family and had worked my way through college and law school before meeting Marcus. What really bothered me was the way Vanessa looked at my ring. Every time we were together, I'd catch her staring at it, not just admiring it the way women sometimes do with each other's jewelry, but studying it, calculating its value, asking detailed questions about where Marcus had bought it, how much it cost, whether it was in During our engagement party, she'd spent an uncomfortable amount of time examining it, holding my hand and turning it this way and that in the light. "It must be nice," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "to be so loved that someone would spend this much money on a ring." And just last month, at Marcus's birthday dinner, she'd made a comment that had stuck with me. "You know, Isabella, you're so careless with that ring. You're always taking it off and setting it down places. Aren't you worried someone might take it?" At the time I'd laughed it off as Now sitting on my bedroom floor staring at an empty ring box, those words felt like a threat. I forced myself to get dressed and go downstairs, hoping against hope that maybe I'd find some innocent explanation. Maybe one of the kids had been playing with it and moved. Maybe it had somehow fallen and someone had picked it up for safekeeping. But as I walked down the hallway past the guest bedroom where David and Vanessa were staying, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Vanessa's voice, talking quietly on the phone. "I know it's Christmas, but I need to know how much something like this would be worth. Yes, I can send you photos. No, I need cash, not store credit." I stood frozen outside their door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she'd hear it. She was trying to sell my ring. On Christmas morning, while sleeping in my home as my guest. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some desperate act by a stranger. This was calculated theft by someone who'd sat at my dinner table, who'd smiled at me while planning to rob me, who'd used the trust and hospitality of our family to steal the most precious thing I owned. I backed away from the door quietly and went downstairs, my mind racing. I needed to think, I needed to plan, and most importantly, I needed to tell Marcus, because what Vanessa didn't know was that my husband wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of man who protected what was his, with the full force of his resources and connections. And she was about to learn exactly what that meant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I found Marcus in his home office, already dressed and reviewing some documents with his morning coffee. Even on Christmas morning, my husband couldn't completely disconnect from his work as CEO of Morrison Industries, the tech company his father had built and he'd expanded into a billion-dollar empire. But when he saw my face, he immediately set everything aside. "Bella, what's wrong?" he asked, using the nickname that always made me feel safe. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I closed the office door behind me and locked it, something I'd never done before in our own home. "Marcus, we need to talk, and I need you to stay calm until I finish telling you everything." He stood up immediately, his 6'2" frame radiating the kind of protective energy that had first drawn me to him. Marcus Morrison wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of man who commanded respect in every room he entered. At 34, he'd already been featured on the cover of Forbes twice. But what I loved most about him was how he never used his power carelessly, until someone crossed his family. "Someone stole my engagement ring," I said quietly. "It was in the box on my nightstand last night. And this morning it's gone, and I think I know who took it." Marcus's expression went completely still. I'd seen this look before, usually during board meetings when someone had made a serious mistake. It was the calm before the storm. "Tell me everything," he said. I explained about finding the empty box, about searching everywhere, about overhearing Vanessa's phone conversation. With each detail I watched Marcus's jaw tighten further. "You're absolutely certain you put it in the box last night?" he asked. "Positive. You know how careful I am with it." He did know. Marcus had watched me develop what he called my ring ritual over the months we'd been engaged. Every night I'd carefully remove it and place it in that specific box. Every morning, I'd put it back on and catch the light streaming through our bedroom window, remembering the moment he'd proposed. "Vanessa," he said, and the way he said her name made me shiver. "That explains a lot. What do you—" Marcus sat back down and gestured for me to take the chair across from his desk. "Bella, there are things about my brother's wife that I've never told you because I hoped I was wrong, but David's been coming to me for financial help more and more frequently over the past year." This was news to me. David always seemed so successful, so put together in his expensive suits and Manhattan lifestyle. What kind of help? Credit card debt, mortgage payments, private school tuition for the girl. Last month he asked me for $50,000 to cover some unexpected expenses. When I pressed him about it, he admitted that Vanessa had developed some expensive habits. What kind of habits? Marcus hesitated. Shopping addiction, primarily, but also gambling. David thinks she's been hiding the extent of it from him. She's maxed out multiple credit cards, taken out personal loans he didn't know about. He's been liquidating his investment accounts to keep them afloat. I felt sick. "And you think she might—" "I think a desperate person does desperate things," Marcus said. "And your ring is worth enough to solve a lot of financial problems." "It's worth more than their mortgage," I said quietly. "It's worth more than most people's houses," Marcus corrected. "The center stone alone appraised at over $100,000. I'd known the ring was expensive, but hearing the numbers still made me dizzy. Marcus had never told me the exact cost, just that money wasn't important when it came to showing me how much he loved me. "What do we do?" I asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment and I could practically see him strategizing. This was the same methodical thinking that had built his empire. "First, we're going to confirm that it's actually gone and not just misplaced. We'll search the house systematically. Then, if we don't find it, we're going to have a very careful conversation with our Christmas guests." "You think she'll admit it?" "I think desperate people who are caught lie until they can't lie anymore. But I also think there are ways to make telling the truth the better option." Before I could ask what he meant, there was a knock on the office door. "Mom, Dad," it was Emma, one of Vanessa's daughters. "Grandpa Richard says breakfast is ready." "We'll be right there, sweetheart," Marcus called out, his voice immediately warm and normal. He looked at me seriously. "We're going to have a normal Christmas morning. We're going to open presents, eat breakfast, smile for photo. And while we're doing that, we're going to watch Vanessa very carefully. I don't know if I can pretend everything's fine." "Yes, you can," Marcus said, taking my hand. "Because you're stronger than you know and because whoever took that ring doesn't realize they just made the biggest mistake of their life." The breakfast table was a picture of holiday perfection. Patricia had made her famous Christmas morning French toast. Richard was entertaining the twins with magic tricks, and David was taking photos of everything for their family album. Vanessa sat at the far end of the table, looking radiant in a red cashmere sweater, her blonde hair perfectly styled even though it was barely 9 a.m. I watched her carefully as Marcus had instructed. She seemed normal, maybe even more cheerful than usual. She complimented the breakfast, laughed at Richard's jokes, and helped the twins cut their French toast. If she was nervous about having stolen jewelry hidden somewhere in our house, she was hiding it perfectly. But then, I noticed something that made my heart race. Vanessa was wearing makeup, full makeup, including expensive-looking jewelry I'd never seen before, diamond earrings, and a tennis bracelet that caught the light every time she moved. Who gets fully dressed up with expensive jewelry for a casual family Christmas breakfast, unless they're planning to go somewhere important? Vanessa, I said casually, you look beautiful this morning. I love your earrings. She touched them automatically, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. Oh, they're new. David got them for me as an early Christmas present. I glanced at David, who looked genuinely confused for just a moment, before his expression went neutral. He hadn't bought those earrings. They're gorgeous. I continued. They look like they came from Tiffany. Actually, Vanessa said, her voice getting slightly higher. I think they might have come from that little boutique on Madison Avenue. David has such good taste. David was staring at his wife now, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he processed the fact that his wife was wearing expensive jewelry he hadn't bought, lying about it to his family. Marcus caught my eye across the table and gave me the slightest nod. He'd noticed too. Well, Marcus said, standing up with his coffee cup, I think it's time we opened presents. Isabella, why don't you get your jewelry for the family photos? I know Mom always loves to see that beautiful engagement ring in the Christmas picture. The color drained from Vanessa's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Actually, I said, playing along perfectly, I can't seem to find my ring this morning. I thought maybe I put it somewhere unusual last night for safekeeping with everyone in the house. You haven't seen it anywhere, have you, Vanessa? No, she said quickly. Too quickly. No, I haven't seen it at all. Marcus smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile I'd seen him use right before destroying a competitor in business negotiation. Well, he said, I'm sure it'll turn up. Things like that always do. Don't they, Vanessa? The silence that followed Marcus's pointed question stretched for what felt like an eternity. Vanessa's face had gone from pale to flushed, and I could see a thin sheen of perspiration on her forehead, despite the cool December morning. I think we should search the house systematically, Marcus announced to the table, his tone casual but his eyes never leaving Vanessa's face. Isabella's engagement ring is very important to us, and I'm sure everyone here would want to help find it. Of course, Richard said immediately, setting down his coffee cup. We'll help look everywhere. That's so sweet of you all, I said, watching Vanessa carefully. But I hate to ruin Christmas morning over this. Maybe it just rolled under something. Nonsense. Patricia chimed in. Family helps family. Besides, that ring is gorgeous. I'd be devastated if I lost something so beautiful. David looked confused by the entire conversation. Vanessa and I can search our room thoroughly, he offered. Maybe one of the girls picked it up and moved it somewhere. I watched Vanessa's reaction to this suggestion. Her eyes darted to David, then to Marcus, then back to her plate. I'm sure that's not necessary, she said quickly. The girls know not to touch other people's things. Kids don't always remember rules when they see something sparkly, Patricia said with a grandmother's knowing smile. Emma and Sophie are good girls, but they're still 7 years old. My daughters would never take something that doesn't belong to them, Vanessa snapped, her voice sharper than the situation warranted. The tension at the table was becoming palpable. David looked at his wife with growing confusion, clearly wondering why she was getting so defensive about a simple suggestion. Of course they wouldn't, I said soothingly. Patricia just meant that kids sometimes move things without thinking about it. We all did things like that when we were little. Marcus stood up and began clearing the breakfast dishes. Why don't we start with the common areas first? Sometimes things fall out of pockets or get moved when people are walking around the house. As we all began to rise from the table, I noticed Vanessa checking her phone. Her fingers were moving quickly across the screen, and from where I was standing, I could see she was deleting something. Text messages maybe? Or photo. Vanessa, I said casually, could you help me check the living room? You were in there late last night, and maybe you noticed if anything seemed out of place. Her head snapped up from her phone. I wasn't in the living room late last night. I went straight to bed after we finished cleaning up dinner. But I remembered differently. I'd gotten up around midnight to get a glass of water and had seen light under the living room door. When I'd peeked in, Vanessa had been sitting on the couch with her phone, and she'd quickly closed it when she saw me. "Oh, I must have been mistaken," I said lightly. "I thought I saw someone in there around midnight." "You must have been dreaming," Vanessa said, but she was avoiding eye contact now. David was studying his wife's face with growing suspicion. After 15 years of marriage, he clearly knew when she was lying. Marcus returned from the kitchen and announced, "I think we should be systematic about this. Why don't we search in pairs? Isabella and I will take our bedroom and bathroom again, just to be thorough. Mom and Dad, could you check the guest suite and make sure it didn't somehow end up in your room? David and Vanessa, you can search your room and the girls' rooms. The girls are still getting dressed," Vanessa said quickly. "Maybe we should wait until later to disturb them." "It's Christmas morning," Richard pointed out. "They should be dressed and ready for presents by now." "They're being slow this morning," Vanessa insisted. "You know how kids are." But even as she spoke, we could hear the twins giggling and running around upstairs, clearly awake and energetic. "I'll go check on them," David said, heading toward the stairs. "No," Vanessa's voice was sharp enough to make everyone stop and stare at her. "I mean, I'll go. They might be embarrassed if Uncle David sees them in their pajamas." The excuse made no sense. David had been around his daughters in their pajamas countless times. He was their father. Marcus and I exchanged glances. Vanessa was spiraling, making increasingly desperate excuses to keep people away from certain areas of the house. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice taking on that calm, authoritative tone I'd heard him use in business meetings, "I think we need to talk, all of us, adults only." He turned to call upstairs, "Emma, Sophie, why don't you go play in the game room for a little while? We'll call you when it's time for presents." The twins' voices called back enthusiastically, and we could hear them thundering down the hall toward the game room Marcus had set up for them. When Marcus turned back to us, his expression was serious. "Vanessa, I'm going to ask you directly, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Do you know where Isabella's engagement ring is?" "I already told you. I haven't seen it," Vanessa said, but her voice was shaking now. "That's not what I asked," Marcus replied. "I asked if you know where it is." David was looking back and forth between his wife and his brother, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. "Marcus," David said slowly, "what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Marcus replied. "I'm asking questions and waiting for honest answers." Vanessa's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it automatically. Whatever she saw on the screen made her face go even paler. "Who's texting you?" David asked, his own suspicion clearly growing. "No one important," Vanessa said, but she was clutching her phone like a lifeline. "May I see your phone?" Marcus asked politely. "Absolutely not," Vanessa snapped. "That's private." "Vanessa," David said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. A hardness, a loss of patience. "What's going on? Why are you acting so strange?" "I'm not acting strange," she protested. "Everyone else is acting strange, making accusations, demanding to search through our things, asking to see my phone. This is supposed to be Christmas morning. And it still can be," I said gently. "As soon as we find my ring." Marcus pulled out his own phone. "I'm going to call the insurance company," he announced. "They'll need a police report for a theft claim this large." "Police?" Vanessa's voice came out as almost a squeak. "Of course," Marcus said, watching her reaction carefully. $100,000 ring doesn't just disappear. Either it was stolen, or there's been some kind of accident. Either way, insurance will require documentation." "You can't call the police on Christmas," Vanessa said desperately. "Think about the girl. Think about how this will ruin their holiday." "The girls don't need to know," Patricia said reasonably. "But Marcus is right. Something this valuable requires proper reporting. David was staring at his wife now, and I could see the exact moment when understanding dawned on his face. The expensive new jewelry she couldn't explain. The financial stress he'd been trying to hide from the family. The way she was acting now, desperate and cornered. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "please tell me you didn't do what I think you did." "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but tears were starting to form in her eyes. "Yes, you do," David said, his voice heavy with resignation and disappointment. "God, Vanessa, yes you do." Marcus was still holding his phone. "I'm giving you one more chance to tell us the truth before I make this call. Where is Isabella's ring?" Vanessa looked around the room at all of us. Her husband's disappointed face, my hurt expression, Marcus's implacable determination, Richard and Patricia's shocked confusion. She was completely surrounded, with nowhere left to run, and no more lies that would hold up under scrutiny. Her phone buzzed again, and this time when she looked at it, she started to cry. "It's at a pawn shop," she whispered. I was supposed to pick up the money this morning." The admission hit the room like a bomb. Vanessa's whispered confession about the pawn shop seemed to echo in the sudden silence, and I watched as David's face crumpled with the weight of what his wife had just revealed. "A pawn shop?" Patricia's voice was barely audible. "You pawned Isabella's engagement ring." Vanessa was sobbing now, ugly tears that destroyed her perfect makeup. "I was going to get it back," she choked out. "I just needed the money for a few days. I have a plan to pay it back before anyone noticed." "What pawn shop?" Marcus's voice was deadly calm, but I could see the fury building behind his eyes. "Golden State Pawn on Riverside Avenue." Vanessa whispered. "I was supposed to pick up the cash this morning at 10. I felt sick to my stomach. My ring, the symbol of Marcus's love, the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned, was sitting in some dingy pawn shop, being treated like any other piece of merchandise." "How much?" David asked, his voice hollow. 40,000, Vanessa admitted. The number hit me like a physical blow. My ring was worth at least $100,000, and she'd sold it for less than half its value to get quick cash. $40,000. Marcus repeated. "You stole a ring worth over $100,000 and sold it for 40,000. "I didn't steal it," Vanessa protested weakly. "I was borrowing it. I was going to buy it back before." "Before what?" David exploded. "Before anyone noticed. It's her engagement ring, Vanessa. She wears it every single day." "I thought maybe she wouldn't notice for a few days over Christmas," Vanessa said, her voice getting smaller. "People sometimes take their rings off during the holidays for cooking and cleaning." "So you planned this," I said, the full scope of her betrayal becoming clear. "You came to our home for Christmas specifically planning to steal from me." Vanessa's silence was answer enough. Marcus was already dialing his phone. "I'm calling the pawn shop," he announced. "And then I'm calling our attorney." "Marcus, please," David said desperately. "Can we try to handle this privately? She'll return the ring. We'll pay back whatever money." "She sold my wife's engagement ring," Marcus said, his voice cutting through David's plea. "This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is that." While Marcus spoke to someone at the pawn shop, I pulled out my own phone and started searching. I needed to see this place, needed to understand where my ring had ended up. Golden State Pawn had a website with photos of their storefront and interior. It looked exactly like what I'd expected: fluorescent lighting, metal security cages, and rows of desperate people's possessions, waiting for someone to claim them, or buy them cheap. The thought of my ring in that environment made me feel nauseous, but it was their online inventory that made my blood boil. I found it immediately. Stunning 3-carat diamond engagement ring, princess cut, platinum setting, excellent condition, $42,000. They were trying to sell my ring for more than they'd paid Vanessa for it. Of course they were. "They still have it," Marcus announced, hanging up his phone. "It hasn't been sold yet, but there are several people interested. The manager is holding it for us, but we need to get there immediately with proof of ownership and payment for the redemption." "How much to get it back?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. $45,000. Marcus said grimly. Plus interest and fees. 45,000. I gasped. But they only paid her 40. That's how pawn shops work, Marcus explained. They charge interest and fees on top of the loan amount. David turned to his wife with disgust. Vanessa, where is the 40,000 you got for the ring? She was crying harder now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I don't have it anymore. What do you mean you don't have? David's voice was rising. You just sold it yesterday. I paid off some credit cards. Vanessa sobbed. And I covered the payment on my car. And I sent money to my mother. And I bought Christmas presents for the girls. You spent $40,000 in one day? I asked, incredulous. I had debts, Vanessa said, defensively. You don't understand what it's like to be drowning financially. So you decided to drag my ring down with you. I shot back. Marcus was on his phone again, this time speaking to someone who was clearly our family attorney. I could hear him explaining the situation in his clipped professional tone, using words like theft, grand larceny, and pressing charges. Marcus, David tried again. Please, I'll pay you back the 45,000. I'll take out a loan, liquidate more investments. This isn't about money, Marcus said, covering his phone. This is about the fact that your wife came into our home as our guest and stole from us. She violated our trust and our hospitality. I know, David said miserably. I know she did. And I'm horrified. But she's the mother of my children. If this becomes a legal matter, if she gets arrested, she should have thought about that before she stole from family, Patricia said sharply. I'd never heard Marcus's mother sound so angry. Miss Morrison, Vanessa pleaded, turning toward Patricia with desperate eyes. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I can fix this. David and I will find a way to pay back the money. Can you fix the fact that you planned this? Patricia interrupted. Can you fix the fact that you came to our son's home for Christmas specifically to steal from Isabella? Can you fix the trust you've destroyed? Marcus finished his call and turned to address the room. Our attorney is meeting us at the pawn shop in 1 hour. Vanessa, you're going to come with us and explain to them exactly how you came to have Isabella's ring. You're going to sign whatever paperwork is necessary to transfer it back to us, and then we're going to discuss what happens next. What do you mean, what happens next? Vanessa asked fearfully. I mean, that stealing a ring worth over $100,000 is a felony, Marcus said bluntly, and we need to decide whether we're going to file criminal charges or handle this civilly. David looked like he might be sick. Marcus, she's family. No, Marcus said, his voice final. She was family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and destroy trust. I was scrolling through more information about the pawn shop when something caught my eye. Marcus, I said urgently, look at this. I showed him my phone screen. Golden State Pawn's website had a section called Recent Acquisitions, and there was my ring, photographed from multiple angles. But there were also other pieces of jewelry listed as recent acquisitions, expensive-looking items that had clearly come from wealthy homes. Look at the dates, I said. All of these pieces were brought in over the past month. And look at the description. Marcus read over my shoulder, and I watched his expression darken. Vintage Cartier watch, men's, excellent condition, Tiffany tennis bracelet, 2 carats, emerald necklace, estate piece. What does this mean, David? It means, Marcus said slowly, that your wife might not be a first-time thief. We all turned to look at Vanessa, who had gone completely white. Vanessa, I said carefully, have you done this before? Have you stolen from other people? I haven't stolen anything, she said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. Then explain how a pawn shop in Connecticut has acquired thousands of dollars worth of high-end jewelry in the past month, Marcus said, all pieces that would typically belong to wealthy families. I don't know anything about other jewelry, Vanessa protested. Marcus pulled out his phone again and took a screenshot of the pawn shop's inventory. We'll see about that, he said, because if you've been running some kind of theft operation, targeting wealthy families. I haven't, Vanessa cried. I swear I haven't. But David was studying his wife's face with growing horror. The Thanksgiving dinner at the Hendersons. he said slowly. You disappeared for a while that night. And Sarah Henderson mentioned the next week that her grandmother's brooch had gone missing. That has nothing to do with me, Vanessa said quickly. And the charity gala last month, David continued, his voice getting stronger as the pieces fell into place. You spent a lot of time in the coat check area, and there were reports afterward of people's jewelry going missing from their coats. David, you're being ridiculous, Vanessa said, but she was backing toward the door now. Am I? David asked. Because suddenly, everything makes sense. The mysterious cash you sometimes had, the expensive gifts you claimed were from secret admirers, the way you always volunteered to help at events where wealthy people would be taking off their jewelry. Marcus was taking notes now, documenting everything David was saying. We're going to need to contact the police about this, he said. If Vanessa has been systematically targeting wealthy families, this is much bigger than just Isabella's ring. No, Vanessa said, her voice rising to a near shriek. You can't do this to me. You can't destroy my life over this. You destroyed your own life, I said, finally finding my voice again. You destroyed it the moment you decided that other people's possessions were yours to take. I was desperate, Vanessa sobbed. You don't understand what it's like to have nothing while everyone around you has everything. So you decided to steal it, Marcus said flatly. You decided that instead of working for what you wanted, or asking for help, or finding legal ways to improve your situation, you'd just take what belonged to other people. Vanessa looked around the room one more time, taking in all of our faces, angry, disappointed, disgusted. She was completely alone now, with no allies and no escape routes. I want a lawyer, she said finally. Good, Marcus replied. You're going to need one. The drive to Golden State Pawn was the most uncomfortable 45 minutes of my life. Marcus insisted that Vanessa come with us, and our attorney, Jonathan Blackwood, met us at the Morrison Industries parking garage before we left. David rode in their car while Vanessa sat in stony silence in our back seat, occasionally sniffling but no longer crying. Miss Morrison, Jonathan had said before we left, addressing Vanessa with cold professionalism, I need to advise you that anything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you in legal proceeding. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right until you have your own legal representation. She's not saying anything, David had replied grimly. She's barely spoken since we got in the car. But as we pulled into the pawn shop parking lot, Vanessa suddenly came alive with desperate energy. Wait, she said, grabbing my arm as I started to get out of the car. Isabella, please, we need to talk about this privately before we go in there. I turned to look at her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something that might have been genuine remorse in her eyes. There's nothing to talk about, I said, but Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. Let her say what she needs to say, he said quietly. But anything she says here she'll need to repeat to the attorney and the pawn shop manager. Vanessa nodded frantically. Yes. Okay, I need you to understand that this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you stole my engagement ring and sold it to a pawn shop, I said bluntly. What exactly am I misunderstanding? I didn't steal it, Vanessa said, her voice taking on that pleading tone I was beginning to recognize. I borrowed it. There's a difference. Borrowed it. Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. You borrowed it without asking, without permission, and with no intention of telling the owner you had taken it. I was going to tell Isabella, Vanessa protested. I was going to explain everything, and pay her back before she even knew it was gone. When? I asked. When exactly were you planning to explain this to me? Vanessa's face crumpled. I know it sounds crazy, but I had a plan. My Instagram account is about to get a major sponsorship deal, 5 figures for a 6-month contract. The money would have been enough to buy back the ring and pay off all my debts. David, who had been listening from outside the car, leaned down to the window. Vanessa, you've been talking about that sponsorship deal for months. It's not real. It is real, Vanessa snapped. Just because you don't understand social media marketing doesn't mean, show me the contract, David interrupted. Show me any paperwork, any official communication from this supposed sponsor. Vanessa pulled out her phone and started scrolling frantically. It's all been through DMs and phone calls. They don't send contracts until... It's a scam, David said wearily. Vanessa, you've been catfished by someone pretending to offer you a sponsorship deal. It's one of the oldest tricks on social media. The color drained from Vanessa's face as the reality of what David was saying hit her. No, she whispered. No, that can't be right. Maria at Lux Lifestyle Brands said. There is no Maria, Marcus said, pulling up something on his phone. Lux Lifestyle Brands doesn't exist. It's a fake company that scammers use to trick influencers into thinking they're getting sponsorship deals. I watched as Vanessa's entire justification for what she'd done crumbled before her eyes. Not only had she stolen my ring based on a lie, but she'd fallen for an internet scam in the process. But they seemed so professional, Vanessa said weakly. They knew all about my account, my engagement rates, my follower demographic. That information is publicly available, Jonathan explained. Scammers research their targets before they make contact. They make themselves seem legitimate by displaying knowledge they could have gotten from anyone's public social media profile. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, staring at her phone as if it might somehow provide a different reality than the one we were presenting her with. Okay, she said finally. Okay, so maybe the sponsorship deal wasn't real, but that doesn't change the fact that I need money desperately. David, tell them about the medical bills. David's expression grew even more pained. What medical bills? Sophie's therapy sessions, Vanessa said. The ones insurance doesn't cover. You know how expensive they are. Sophie doesn't need therapy, David said slowly. Vanessa, what are you talking about? The behavioral issues at school, Vanessa pressed. The teachers said she needed professional help. No, they didn't, David said, his voice getting stronger. Her teacher said she was adjusting well to second grade. Vanessa, are you making this up too? I watched this exchange with growing disbelief. Vanessa wasn't just a thief, she was a compulsive liar, creating elaborate justifications for her behavior that had no basis in reality. I'm not making anything up, Vanessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. You just don't pay attention to what's happening with our children. I pay attention to everything that happens with our children, David said firmly. And neither Emma nor Sophie has any medical or behavioral issues that require expensive therapy. Marcus was taking notes on his phone, documenting every lie Vanessa told and every contradiction David exposed. What about your mother's cancer treatment? Vanessa tried again. You said yourself that the experimental treatments aren't covered by her insurance. My mother doesn't have cancer, David said, his voice now filled with a mixture of anger and despair. Vanessa, my mother is perfectly healthy. She just had her annual physical 2 months ago. But you said, I never said anything about cancer treatments, David interrupted. You're confusing me with someone else, or you're just making things up as you go along. Jonathan was writing rapidly in his legal pad, documenting each false claim as it was revealed and debunked. Miss Morrison, he said to Vanessa, I need to ask you directly, is there any truthful justification for why you took Mrs. Chen-Morrison's ring? Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out if there was any story she could tell that might generate sympathy or understanding. I wanted nice things, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to feel like I belonged in this family, with all your money and your beautiful house and your expensive jewelry. I wanted to feel special. So you decided to steal from Isabella to make yourself feel better? Marcus asked. I decided to borrow something beautiful for a few days, Vanessa said. But even she seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. I thought maybe if I wore it, if I posted pictures with it, people would see me differently. You posted pictures wearing my stolen ring? I asked, horrified. Vanessa pulled out her phone and reluctantly showed me her Instagram account. There, posted just yesterday morning, was a photo of her hand wearing my engagement ring, captioned feeling blessed this Christmas season. Grateful Christmas joy, blessed. The post had dozens of comments from her followers, all praising the ring and asking where it came from. Vanessa had responded to several comments with heart emojis and vague statements about family heirlooms and Christmas surprises. You told people it was a family heirloom, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You stole my ring and then lied to hundreds of people about where it came from. I didn't lie, Vanessa protested weakly. It is a family heirloom. It's part of the Morrison family now. It's part of my family, I corrected. and it was never yours to wear or photograph or claim as your own. Marcus was screenshotting Vanessa's Instagram post and the comments. "This is evidence of intent to defraud," he told Jonathan. "She not only stole the ring but used it to enhance her online image and potentially gain followers or engagement." "I understand," Jonathan replied. "This significantly strengthens our case if we decide to pursue criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" Vanessa's voice cracked. "You can't be serious. It's a family matter." "It stopped being a family matter when you committed a felony," Marcus said. "Grand theft of property worth over $100,000 is a serious crime, Vanessa. Add in the fraud aspect of your social media posts, and you're looking at multiple charges." "But I'm giving it back," Vanessa said, desperately. "We're here to get it back right now. That should count for something." "You're not giving it back," David said bitterly. "We're buying it." "Isabella and Marcus are paying $45,000 to retrieve property that was stolen from them. That's not returning something. That's extortion." "I didn't know they would charge fees," Vanessa protested. "You didn't care. You were so focused on getting quick cash that you never thought about the consequences for anyone else." Jonathan checked his watch. "We should go inside now. The pawn shop manager is expecting us, and we want to recover the ring before any other complications arrive." As we all got out of the cars and walked toward the pawn shop entrance, Vanessa made one final attempt at manipulation. "Isabella," she said, catching my arm again, "I know you're angry. I know I made a terrible mistake. But think about Emma and Sophie. Think about what this will do to them if their mother gets arrested. They're innocent children who don't deserve to have their lives destroyed because I made a bad decision." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the remorseful sister-in-law she was trying to portray, but the calculating manipulator she'd revealed herself to be. "You should have thought about your daughters before you decided to become a thief," I said quietly. "And you should have thought about them before you decided to lie to everyone about everything." "I'm not a thief," Vanessa said one last time, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "Yes," I said, opening the door to the pawn shop. The inside of Golden State Pawn was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on display cases, filled with desperate people's former treasure. The smell of cleaning chemicals couldn't quite mask the underlying odor of desperation and broken dreams. Behind the bulletproof glass sat a heavy-set man in his 50s, wearing a stained polo shirt and a bored expression that suggested he'd seen every sob story in the book. His name tag read, "Frank, manager." "You the Morrison family?" Frank asked without looking up from his paperwork. "Yes," Marcus replied. "We're here about the engagement ring." Frank buzzed us through a security door into a small back office that looked like it had been decorated in 1987 and never updated. The walls were covered with certificates, licenses, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of people who had tried to steal from the shop. "So," Frank said, settling into a creaky office chair, "your wife here says she needs to get back some jewelry she pawned, but she can't provide the pawn ticket, and now you're claiming it was stolen property." "It was stolen property," Jonathan said firmly, pulling out a folder of documents. "We have proof of ownership, insurance documentation, and a signed confession from the person who stole it." "I didn't steal anything," Vanessa interjected weakly, but Frank waved her off. "Lady, I've heard every story there is. Right now I'm more interested in what the paperwork says." Jonathan spread out the documents on Frank's desk: my insurance appraisal, photos of me wearing the ring at our engagement party, the original purchase receipt from the Manhattan jeweler where Marcus had it custom made. Frank examined everything with the practiced eye of someone who dealt with disputed ownership claims regularly. "This all looks legitimate," he admitted. "Ring matches the description serial numbers match. Photos show the lady wearing it before yesterday." "Yesterday?" Marcus asked sharply. "She brought it in yesterday?" "Christmas Eve afternoon," Frank confirmed. "Right before we closed." Which should have been my first red flag. Honestly, people don't usually pawn family heirlooms on Christmas Eve unless something's seriously wrong. "What did she tell you about the ring?" I asked. Frank consulted his computer screen. "Said it was her ring, that she needed quick cash for a family emergency. Medical bills for her kid. Pretty standard story. Her kid doesn't have any medical issues, David said quietly. Yeah, well, like I said, I've heard every story. Frank turned back to his computer. But here's the thing that's really bothering me. This isn't the first time your wife has been in here. The room went silent. Vanessa had gone completely pale, and David was staring at her with a mixture of horror and recognition. What do you mean? Marcus asked carefully. Frank pulled up what appeared to be a customer database. Vanessa Morrison has been a regular customer for about 8 months, usually brings in high-end jewelry, sometimes watches, always has good documentation, always claims the items belong to her. How many times? David asked, his voice barely audible. 14 separate transactions, Frank read from his screen. Total value of items pawned. Let me add this up. Approximately $230,000 worth of merchandise. The number hit the room like a physical blow. David actually staggered backward and had to lean against the wall for support. $230,000? I repeated, unable to process the magnitude of what Frank was telling us. Give or take, Frank confirmed. She's been one of our better customers, honestly. Always professional, always had proper ID, never caused trouble. Frank, Jonathan said carefully, do you still have records of the other items she pawned? Some of them, Frank replied. Depends on whether they were redeemed or sold. Want me to print out her transaction history? Yes, Marcus said immediately. All of it. While Frank worked on printing the records, David slumped into a chair and put his head in his hands. Vanessa, he said without looking up. What have you done? I can explain, Vanessa said, but her voice was shaking. Each time was different. Each time I had a good reason. $230,000 worth of good reasons, David asked, finally looking up at his wife. Where did you get $230,000 worth of jewelry to pawn? Vanessa was quiet, clearly calculating whether the truth would be better or worse than continued lying. Frank handed Jonathan a thick stack of papers. Here's everything. Dates, descriptions, amounts paid, redemption dates where applicable. Jonathan began reading through the list, and with each item, his expression grew more serious. Cartier watch, pawned August 15th, never redeemed. Tiffany tennis bracelet, pawned September 3rd, never redeemed. Emerald necklace, estate piece, pawned September 2. Wait, I interrupted. Read that description again. Emerald necklace, estate piece, Victorian setting, approximately 15 carats total weight. That sounds like Mrs. Henderson's necklace, I said, looking at Marcus. Remember, Sarah Henderson mentioned at the country club that her grandmother's emerald necklace had gone missing after their dinner party. Marcus was already pulling out his phone. I'm calling Sarah Henderson right now. No, wait, Vanessa said desperately. You don't understand. Aid didn't steal that necklace. Then how did you come to have it? Jonathan asked. I found it, Vanessa said weakly. It was just lying on the bathroom counter at their house. I thought someone had left it there by mistake. So you decided to take it and pawn it instead of returning it to the hostess? David asked, incredulously. I was going to return it, Vanessa protested. But then I needed the money, and I thought maybe if I pawned it temporarily. You thought you'd steal someone's grandmother's necklace and sell it for cash, Marcus said bluntly. Frank was watching this exchange with professional interest. Look, folks, I run a legitimate business here. I don't knowingly accept stolen merchandise. But if this lady has been bringing me stolen goods for 8 months, I need to protect myself and my business. What does that mean? David asked. It means I'm calling the police, Frank said, reaching for his phone. I've got a legal obligation to report suspected stolen merchandise, and I've got records showing this woman has been potentially running a theft operation for months. Please don't call the police, Vanessa begged. I have children. This will destroy their lives. You should have thought about your children before you decided to become a professional thief, Frank replied unsympathetically. Jonathan was still reading through the transaction records. Marcus, look at these dates. Most of these transactions correspond with social events that wealthy families in your area would have attended. Charity galas, dinner parties, country club events. She's been systematically targeting social events where wealthy people would be wearing expensive jewelry. Marcus realized. This isn't desperation or bad decisions. This is a calculated criminal enterprise. David was staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. The charity auction last month, he said slowly. You volunteered to help with coat check, and there were reports afterward of people's jewelry going missing from their coats and purses. I was helping, Vanessa protested. I was just trying to be useful. You were shopping, I said, the full scope of her operation becoming clear. You volunteered for positions that would give you access to people's personal belongings, and then you stole from them. The art gallery opening where you spent so much time in the ladies' room, David continued, his voice getting stronger as the pieces fell into place. The wedding reception where you offered to help the bride with her dress. The business conference where you volunteered to organize the gift bags. Every time you volunteer to help at an event, people's valuables go missing, Marcus observed. That's not a coincidence. Frank was on the phone with the police, explaining the situation in the practiced tone of someone who'd made similar calls before. Yeah, I need someone down here for a stolen property case. Looks like we've got a repeat offender who's been running a theft operation through my shop. How long before they get here? Jonathan asked. 10, 15 minutes, Frank replied. They take this stuff seriously when it involves this much money and this many victims. Vanessa was crying again, but this time her tears seemed more about getting caught than about genuine remorse. You're all destroying my life over some jewelry, she sobbed. You're tearing apart a family because I made some mistakes. You didn't make mistakes, David said, his voice hard with finality. You made choices. You chose to steal from people who trusted you. You chose to lie to me about where money was coming from. You chose to use our children as cover for your criminal activities. I never used the children, Vanessa protested. Every time you brought them to an event where you planned to steal something, you used them, David replied. Every time you told people you needed money for their medical care or their education, you used them. Every time you made them complicit in your lies by having them around when you were casing your next target, you used them. Marcus was photographing all the transaction records with his phone. We're going to need to contact every victim listed here, he told Jonathan. They all deserve to know what happened to their property. Some of these people are our friends, I realized, reading over the list. People who welcomed Vanessa into their homes, who trusted her around their personal belongings. People who trusted our family, Marcus corrected grimly. This reflects on all of us now. Vanessa seemed to realize that the gravity of her situation was finally sinking in for everyone in the room. Marcus, she said desperately, you have money, you have influence, you could make this go away, you could talk to these people, pay them back, handle this quiet. You want me to enable your criminal behavior by covering up your crimes? Marcus asked. I want you to think about your family, Vanessa pleaded. Think about David and the girls. Think about how this will affect everyone. I am thinking about my family, Marcus replied. I'm thinking about my wife, who was violated and betrayed by someone she trusted. I'm thinking about my brother, who deserves to know the truth about the woman he married. And I'm thinking about those children, who deserve better than a mother who's a professional thief. Outside, we could hear the sound of police sirens getting closer. The police arrived in 2 separate vehicles. Detective Maria Santos, from the Maplewood Heights Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, and Officer James Chen, who specialized in theft cases involving high-value items. Detective Santos was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes, and the bearing of someone who'd seen every kind of financial fraud imaginable. Mr. Morrison, she said, extending her hand to Marcus. I'm Detective Santos. We spoke on the phone earlier about the stolen jewelry case. Thank you for coming so quickly, Marcus replied. This situation has become much more complicated than we initially realized. Detective Santos looked around the cramped pawn shop office, taking in all the faces. Frank behind his desk with stacks of transaction records, Jonathan with his legal documents, David slumped in defeat, Vanessa still crying in the corner, and Marcus and me standing with our evidence folder. Why don't we start from the beginning? Detective Santos said, pulling out a digital recorder. I understand we're dealing with a stolen engagement ring, but the dispatcher mentioned there might be additional criminal activity involved. Jonathan stepped forward with his folder. Detective, We initially came here to recover Mrs. Chen-Morrison's engagement ring, which was stolen from their home on Christmas Eve and pawned here yesterday, but Mr. Frank has provided us with records showing that the suspect has been conducting similar transactions for 8 months. Detective Santos examined the insurance documents and photos that proved my ownership of the ring. This documentation is excellent, she said. Serial numbers, professional appraisal, clear photographs showing the victim wearing the ring. This makes our job much easier, she turned to Frank. Mr. Kowalski, you mentioned additional transactions involving the suspect. Frank handed over the printed transaction history, 14 separate pawns over 8 months, total value around $230,000, all high-end jewelry, all brought in by the same woman with proper ID. Detective Santos studied the list, her expression growing more serious with each item. These are significant amounts, she said. Mr. Kowalski, did you notice any patterns or unusual behaviors from the suspect during these transactions? Well, she always had good documentation, Frank replied. Always claimed the items were hers, usually had some story about needing quick cash for family emergencies. But looking back, the stories never quite added up. What do you mean? Frank consulted his note. She claimed her daughter needed surgery in August, but then claimed her son needed surgery in October. But I've seen her around town with her kids, and they're both healthy girls. No sons, no medical issues that I could see. Officer Chen had been listening while examining Vanessa's Instagram account on his phone. Detective Santos, the suspect, has been posting photos of herself wearing various pieces of high-end jewelry over the past several months. Many of these photos correspond with the dates of the pawn transactions. He showed his phone to Detective Santos, who scrolled through the images with professional interest. So she's been stealing jewelry, wearing it for social media content, and then pawning it for cash. Detective Santos asked. That appears to be the pattern, Officer Chen confirmed. She's also been responding to comments on these posts, claiming the jewelry items are gifts from her husband or family heirlooms. David looked up at this information. I never bought her any of that jewelry, he said hoarsely. I can provide bank statements proving I never made purchases that expensive. Detective Santos turned her attention to Vanessa, who had been trying to make herself invisible in the corner of the office. Miss Morrison, I need to advise you of your rights, Detective Santos said formally. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you? Vanessa nodded weakly. I need a verbal response for the record, Detective Santos said. Yes, Vanessa whispered. I understand. Do you wish to speak with us, or do you want to wait for an attorney? Vanessa looked around the room desperately, as if hoping someone would rescue her from the situation. I want to explain. This isn't what it looks like. Jonathan immediately stepped forward. Detective, as the victim's attorney, I want it on record that Miss Morrison has been consistently lying about the circumstances of these thefts. She's provided multiple false justifications and fabricated stories about family emergencies that don't exist. Noted, Detective Santos said. Miss Morrison, if you choose to speak with us, everything you say will be recorded and can be used as evidence. Are you sure you don't want to wait for legal representation? I don't need a lawyer, Vanessa said, though her voice was shaky. I haven't done anything wrong. Detective Santos exchanged a look with Officer Chen. Mrs. Morrison, we have documentation showing you pawned stolen property worth over $200,000. We have social media evidence showing you wearing and claiming ownership of jewelry that belongs to other people. How exactly is that not wrong? I was borrowing those things, Vanessa said, falling back on her earlier justification. I always intended to pay people back. Borrowing implies permission, Detective Santos pointed out. Did you have permission from the owners to take these items? Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. Not exactly, she finally admitted. So you took items without permission, pawned them for cash, and used social media to falsely claim ownership, Detective Santos summarized. That's textbook theft and fraud. Officer Chen pulled out his own fold. Detective, I've been in contact with the Hartford County Sheriff's Office. They've had multiple reports over the past 8 months of jewelry thefts at high-end social events. The descriptions and timing match several of the items on Mr. Kowalski's transaction list. How many potential victims are we looking at? Detective Santos asked. At least 12 separate families, Officer Chen replied. Possibly more if Mrs. Morrison was targeting events outside our immediate jurisdiction. Marcus leaned forward. Detective Santos, my family moves in certain social circles in this area. If Vanessa has been systematically targeting wealthy families at charity events and private parties, I can provide you with a list of events she attended and the families who might have been affected. That would be extremely helpful, Detective Santos said. White-collar crime like this often involves victims who don't immediately realize they've been targeted, especially when the thefts occur during social events where people naturally remove jewelry for dancing, dining, or other activities. Frank had been listening to this exchange with growing concern. Detective, what does this mean for my business? I run a legitimate operation here. I had no way of knowing this woman was bringing me stolen merchandise. Kowalski, as long as you cooperate fully with our investigation and provide all documentation requested, your business shouldn't face any liability, Detective Santos assured him. However, we will need to examine all the items Mrs. Morrison pawned that haven't been redeemed or sold. Most of them are still here, Frank said. She rarely came back to redeem anything, just took the cash and disappeared until the next time. Detective Santos turned back to Vanessa. Miss Morrison, given the scope of what we're discussing here, I strongly recommend you reconsider speaking with us without an attorney present. You're looking at multiple felony charges across several jurisdictions. Multiple felonies? David asked, his voice strained. Grand theft, fraud, conspiracy, potentially racketeering if we can prove this was an organized criminal enterprise, Detective Santos explained. Each stolen item over a certain value constitutes a separate felony charge. How many years in prison are we talking about? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Given the total value involved and the systematic nature of the crimes, we could be looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted on all charges, Detective Santos said. Possibly more if we find evidence of additional victims. Vanessa made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. 20 years. My daughters will be adults by the time I get out. You should have thought about your daughters before you decided to become a professional thief, Detective Santos said, without sympathy. This isn't a case of someone stealing bread to feed their family. This is calculated, systematic theft targeting wealthy families for luxury items you wanted to wear and sell. Officer Chen had been coordinating with other departments on his radio. Detective, the Financial Crimes Unit in Hartford wants to interview Mrs. Morrison about thefts at the Riverside Country Club charity auction last month. They've had 4 separate families report missing jewelry from that event, and the state police want to talk to her about the governor's fundraising dinner, where several political wives reported thefts, Detective Santos added, checking her own messages. Mrs. Morrison, it appears you've been quite busy. Vanessa looked around the room one more time, taking in all the evidence mounting against her, all the law enforcement agencies interested in speaking with her, all the families she'd stolen. For the first time since this ordeal began, she seemed to understand that there was no talking her way out of this situation. I want a lawyer, she said finally. I want a lawyer right now. Smart choice, Detective Santos said. You're going to need a very good one. The arrest process was swift and professional. Detective Santos called for a transport unit while Officer Chen began the formal booking procedure right there in the pawnshop office. Vanessa sat in stunned silence as they fingerprinted her using a portable scanner and took her photo with a digital camera. Miss Morrison, Detective Santos said, as she filled out the arrest paperwork, you're being charged with grand theft in the first degree, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Additional charges may be filed as our investigation continues. What happens to my children? Vanessa asked, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. That's something you'll need to discuss with your husband and your attorney, Detective Santos replied. Child services will likely be involved given the scope of the criminal charges. David looked like he might be sick. Detective, I had no knowledge of any of this criminal activity. I've been trying to cover my wife's debts for months, but I never knew where they were coming from. Miss Morrison, we'll need to interview you extensively, but based on the evidence we've seen today, you appear to be another victim rather than an accomplice, Detective Santos said. However, we will need to examine your financial records to verify that you weren't knowingly benefiting from the stolen property. Of course, David said immediately. I'll provide whatever documentation you need. The transport officers arrived and began the process of taking Vanessa into custody. As they put handcuffs on her, she looked at David with desperate eyes. David, please, she said, please don't let them take the girls away from me. Whatever else happens, please protect our daughter. I'll protect them, David said, but his voice was cold. I'll protect them from you. As Vanessa was led away, Detective Santos turned to Marcus and me. We'll need you both to come to the station to give formal statements. And Mr. Morrison, she said to Marcus, given your family's position in the community, this case is likely to attract media attention. You might want to prepare for that. What kind of media attention? I asked, though I was dreading the answer. Wealthy socialite arrested for systematic theft targeting high society events, Officer Chen said grimly. The newspapers are going to love this story. Marcus was already on his phone, presumably calling his public relations team at Morrison Industries. I could hear him speaking in low, urgent tones about crisis management and media strategy. Frank was packing up the transaction records to hand over to the police. You know, he said to Detective Santos, I've been in this business for 23 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Usually when people pawn stolen goods, it's desperate stuff. Someone's grandmother's wedding ring to pay rent. But this woman was running a whole operation. What made her different? Detective Santos asked. The professionalism, Frank replied. She always had proper ID, always had plausible stories, always dressed well and spoke nice. She looked like exactly the kind of person who would own expensive jewelry. Most thieves look nervous or suspicious, but she acted like she belonged. That's what made her so effective, Detective Santos observed. She used her social position and appearance to deflect suspicion. My phone started buzzing with text messages. Word was already spreading through our social circle about what had happened. The first message was from Sarah Henderson. Isabella, I just heard about Vanessa being arrested. Was she the one who stole my grandmother's necklace? Marcus, I said, showing him the message. People are already talking. Marcus finished his call and looked at the message. Sarah Henderson was one of the victims according to the pawnshop records. We're going to need to call her back and confirm that her necklace is among the items being held as evidence. Detective Santos overheard this. Actually, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, we're going to need your help contacting the other victim. You move in the same social circles and people are more likely to trust a call from you than from the police initially. What exactly do we need to tell them? That items reported stolen from their homes or at events they attended have been recovered as part of a criminal investigation, Detective Santos explained. They'll need to come to the station to identify their property and give statements about when and how the thefts occurred. Over the next hour, Marcus and I made call after call to families in our social circle. The conversations were uniformly shocking and heartbreaking. Margaret, Marcus said into his phone, speaking to Margaret Whitman, whose husband owned several car dealerships in the area. This is Marcus Morrison. I'm calling because the police have recovered some jewelry that may belong to you. Yes, your mother's sapphire bracelet, Vanessa Morrison, my sister-in-law. No, I had no idea until today. I called Jennifer Chen, whose family owned a chain of upscale restaurants. Jennifer, it's Isabella. I have some difficult news about your missing diamond earrings. They were pawned by someone we both know. I'm so sorry. I had no idea this was happening. Each call revealed the same pattern. Families had noticed valuable jewelry missing after social events where Vanessa had been present, but most had assumed they'd simply misplaced the items or that the theft was random. No one had connected the disappearances to the charming, well-dressed woman who always volunteered to help at events. The Hendersons lost 3 pieces over different events, Marcus reported after finishing his call. Sarah's grandmother's emerald necklace, her mother's pearl bracelet, and a diamond brooch that belonged to her great-aunt. 3 pieces from one family? Detective Santos asked, looking up from her notes. Vanessa became close to Sarah over the past year. She was invited to multiple family events, birthdays, anniversaries, holiday parties. Sarah considered her a friend,
That's particularly cruel, Officer Chen observed, using genuine friendship as cover for systematic theft. My phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca Martinez, whose husband was a prominent surgeon. Isabella, I just got off the phone with Margaret Whitman. She said you were calling people about stolen jewelry. I've been missing my wedding anniversary necklace since the hospital charity gala in October.
Rebecca, I'm so sorry, I said. The police have recovered multiple pieces of jewelry. You'll need to come to the station to see if yours is among them. Was it really Vanessa Morrison who took them? Rebecca asked. She seemed so nice. She even helped me look for my necklace when I realized it was missing that night. She helped you look for it? I repeated, and Detective Santos looked up sharply at this information. Yes, she was so concerned when I mentioned it was missing. She helped me search the ladies' room, and even offered to check the coat room where she'd been volunteering. We spent 20 minutes looking for it together. After I hung up, Detective Santos was taking notes rapidly. This shows premeditation and psychological manipulation, she said. The suspect wasn't just stealing, she was actively participating in the victim's distress to deflect suspicion from herself. It's sociopathic behavior, Officer Chen added. Normal people feel guilt when they hurt others. She was apparently enjoying the victim's confusion and pain. Marcus finished his round of calls and sat down heavily in one of Frank's chairs. 12 families confirmed losses so far, he reported. Total estimated value of reported thefts is approaching $400,000. 400,000. I gasped, but the pawn shop records only showed 230,000. She wasn't pawning everything she stole, Detective Santos realized. She was keeping some items for herself, probably the pieces that were too distinctive to sell, or that she particularly wanted to wear. Where would she keep items she wasn't pawning? Marcus asked. We'll find out when we search her residence, Detective Santos said. We're getting warrants for her home, her car, and any storage units or safety deposit boxes registered to her name. Officer Chen's radio crackled with an update. Detective Santos, we've got reports of additional thefts from 3 more jurisdictions. Westport PD has 2 families reporting missing jewelry after events where Mrs. Morrison was present. Greenwich has 1 family, and Stamford has 4 families. This is becoming a multi-jurisdictional investigation, Detective Santos said grimly. We're looking at potential charges in 5 different Connecticut towns, plus possible federal charges if she crossed state lines with stolen property. Federal charges? Marcus asked. If she stole items in Connecticut and pawned them in New York or vice versa, that becomes federal jurisdiction, Detective Santos explained. Given her social connections and travel patterns, it's entirely possible. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Saw the news alert about arrests in Maplewood Heights. Are you okay? Do you need me to come home? There's already a news alert, I asked, showing Marcus the message. Marcus checked his phone and pulled up a local news website. Morrison Industries CEO's sister-in-law arrested in high society theft ring. He read aloud. The story broke about 10 minutes ago. How did they get the information so quickly? Detective Santos asked, frowning. Police scanners, Officer Chen explained. Local news monitors all emergency frequencies. Plus half the witnesses probably posted about it on social media before they even left the pawn shop. This is going to be everywhere by tonight, Marcus said grimly. National news will pick it up because of the Morrison Industries connection and the dollar amounts involved. Detective Santos stood up to leave. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, I need you both at the station tomorrow morning at 9 to give formal statements. Bring all documentation related to your stolen ring and any other interactions you've had with the suspect. What about David? I asked. And the children? Mr. Morrison is being interviewed separately as a potential victim and witness, Detective Santos said. Child Services will evaluate the children's living situation, but since their father had no knowledge of the criminal activity, they'll likely remain in his custody. And Vanessa? Marcus asked. Miss Morrison will be held without bail given the flight risk and the seriousness of the charges, Detective Santos replied. Her arraignment is scheduled for Monday morning, As I finally left the pawn shop, I felt emotionally drained. The woman I'd thought was my sister-in-law, someone I'd welcomed into my home and trusted around my most precious possessions, had turned out to be a calculating criminal who'd spent months systematically stealing from everyone who'd shown her kindness. "Marcus," I said as we got into our car, "how did we not see this? How did none of us realize what she was doing?" "Because she was good at it," Marcus replied grimly. "And because we trusted family. We never imagined that someone we loved could be capable of something like this." My phone continued buzzing with messages from friends, family members, and even reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. The story was spreading like wildfire through our community, and I realized that our lives were about to be changed forever by Vanessa's choices. "Tomorrow," Marcus said, "we start picking up the pieces." By the time we arrived home from the police station the next afternoon, our front gate was surrounded by news vans and reporters. The story had exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. My phone hadn't stopped ringing for 18 hours straight. "Mrs. Chen-Morrison," a reporter shouted as our car approached the gate. "How do you feel about your sister-in-law's alleged theft ring? Did you suspect anything was wrong?" Marcus kept his eyes straight ahead as we drove through the gate, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tightening. The security system automatically closed the gate behind us, but we could still hear the reporters calling out questions. "Channel 8 News wants a statement about the Morrison family's response to the charges," Marcus said, reading through his messages. "CNN is asking for an interview. The Wall Street Journal wants to discuss the impact on Morrison Industries stock." "Morrison Industries stock?" I asked. "How does this affect your company? When the CEO's family is involved in a high-profile criminal case, investors get nervous," Marcus explained. "Our stock dropped 3% yesterday, and the board is calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow." I sank into our kitchen chair and pulled up the news coverage on my laptop. The headlines were even worse than I'd feared. "Connecticut socialite accused of running theft ring targeting wealthy families." "Morrison Industries CEO's sister-in-law charged with Felsian jewelry theft spree." "High society scandal trust fund thief preyed on friends and family." But it was the social media coverage that really made me feel sick. Someone had leaked Vanessa's mugshot, and it was being shared thousands of times with increasingly cruel comments. Her Instagram account had been flooded with angry messages from people calling her everything from a trust fund thief to much worse. "Look at this," I said, showing Marcus a Twitter thread that had gone viral. Someone had compiled screenshots of all Vanessa's Instagram posts, showing her wearing stolen jewelry, creating a timeline of her crimes with commentary about each piece. This post from September 15th shows her wearing the Henderson family's emerald necklace at a charity gala. The thread read. She captioned it, "Feeling grateful for family heirlooms," while she was literally wearing stolen property she'd taken from a friend's bathroom. The responses to the thread were brutal but justified. Hundreds of people were sharing their own stories of theft and betrayal, using Vanessa's case as an example of how trust could be weaponized by narcissistic criminals. My phone rang again. This time it was Detective Santos. "Mrs. Chen-Morrison, I wanted to update you on the search of Mrs. Morrison's residence," she said. "We found approximately $150,000 worth of additional stolen jewelry hidden throughout the house." $150,000, I repeated, putting the call on speaker so Marcus could hear. "Hidden in various locations," Detective Santos continued. "Some pieces were in a safety deposit box she'd rented under a false name. Others were sewn into the lining of winter coats in her closet. She even had items hidden inside her children's toy boxes." "She used her children's toys to hide stolen jewelry?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with disgust. "It appears." "We also found detailed records of the families she'd targeted, including notes about their security systems, their social schedules, and the types of jewelry they typically wore to various events. She was planning these thefts, I realized. She wasn't just opportunistically stealing when she saw something she wanted. She was studying these families and planning when and how to steal from them." "That's exactly what the evidence suggests," Detective Santos confirmed. "We found a notebook with entries like Henderson anniversary party, Sarah wears emerald necklace, leaves in master bedroom during dinner, and Martina's charity gala, Rebecca removes tennis bracelet for dancing, coat check area unsupervised for 10 minutes. She was taking notes on when people were vulnerable, Marcus said. This wasn't impulse behavior. This was calculated predatory behavior. The district attorney is reviewing the evidence to determine if additional charges should be filed, Detective Santos said. The level of premeditation and planning involved suggests this could be prosecuted as organized crime. After Detective Santos hung up, Marcus and I sat in stunned silence for a moment. The scope of Vanessa's criminal enterprise was beyond anything we'd imagined. Marcus, I said finally, I need to do something about this social media situation. People are posting pictures of our house, speculating about whether you were involved, even questioning whether Morrison Industries' money was used to fund her theft. Marcus pulled up the Morrison Industries' social media accounts. The company's getting destroyed online too, he said grimly. Look at these comments on our latest product announcement. The comments section was filled with messages like, how can we trust a company whose CEO can't even control his own family, and boycott Morrison Industries until they explain their connection to the theft ring. I need to make a public statement, Marcus decided. People need to know that Morrison Industries had nothing to do with Vanessa's crimes, and that our family is cooperating fully with law enforcement. Are you sure that's wise? I asked. Won't that just draw more attention to the situation? The attention is already there, Marcus pointed out. If I don't control the narrative, someone else will. That evening, Marcus held a press conference on the front steps of Morrison Industries headquarters. I watched it live on the news from our living room, feeling proud of his strength and clarity under impossible circumstances. I want to address the criminal charges filed against my sister-in-law, Vanessa Morrison, Marcus said, looking directly into the cameras. Neither Morrison Industries nor any member of my immediate family had any knowledge of Mrs. Morrison's alleged criminal activity. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement and are committed to ensuring that all victims receive justice. A reporter immediately shouted a question. Mr. Morrison, how do you respond to speculation that your family's wealth may have been used to facilitate these crimes? All Morrison family assets are accounted for and have been made available for law enforcement review, Marcus replied calmly. Mrs. Morrison's alleged crimes were committed without the knowledge, consent, or financial support of any other family member. What about your brother David? Another reporter called out. Was he involved in the theft ring? My brother David is a victim in this case, not a perpetrator, Marcus said firmly. He has been cooperating with law enforcement and providing evidence to help build the case against his wife. After the press conference, social media reaction was mixed, but generally more supportive of Marcus's position. However, Vanessa's case had become a symbol of broader issues about wealth inequality, trust, and privilege that went far beyond our specific situation. A viral TikTok video used Vanessa's story to discuss how wealthy people often exploit personal relationships for financial gain. This is what happens when someone feels entitled to other people's wealth, the creator said, showing screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram post. She literally stole from people who considered her family and then posted about it like she was living her best life. But the most devastating public exposure came from an unexpected source, David himself. 3 days after Vanessa's arrest, he posted a long statement on his own social media accounts that immediately went viral. I want to address the criminal charges against my wife Vanessa Morrison, David wrote. For the past year I have been liquidating my investments, borrowing against my retirement accounts, and taking loans to cover what I thought were legitimate family expenses. I now know that I was actually funding a criminal enterprise. The post continued. Vanessa told me our credit card debt was from normal household expenses. She told me our children needed expensive medical treatments that weren't covered by insurance. She told me her mother was dying of cancer and needed financial support. None of these things were true. Every dollar I gave her to cover these supposed expenses was actually being used to fund her lifestyle while she stole hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry from people who trusted her. David's post included bank statements showing how much money he'd given Vanessa over the past year, over $80,000 in total. I am sharing this information because the public deserves to know that I was a victim of my wife's lies,
not a co-conspirator in her crime. I am also sharing this as a warning to others. Financial manipulation often accompanies other forms of criminal behavior. The response to David's post was overwhelmingly supportive. Thousands of people shared their own stories of being financially manipulated by partners or family members. Support groups for victims of financial abuse began using Vanessa's case as an example of how criminals exploit trust and intimacy to commit theft, but perhaps the most powerful public response came from the victims themselves. Sarah Henderson, Margaret Whitman, Rebecca Martinez and several other families who'd been targeted by Vanessa issued a joint statement that was published in the Hartford Courant and picked up by national news outlets. We want the public to understand that this case is not about wealthy people complaining about losing expensive jewelry, the statement read. This case is about trust, friendship and the violation of basic human decency. Vanessa Morrison was welcomed into our homes, trusted with our children and treated as family. She used that trust to study our habits, plan her crimes, and steal items that had deep sentimental value beyond their monetary worth. The statement continued. Many of the items she stole were family heirlooms that cannot be replaced, pieces that had been passed down through generations, and held memories of grandparents, great-grandparents, and family history. The financial value, while significant, is nothing compared to the emotional value of these irreplaceable pieces. The victim's statement shifted public perception in a way that all the news coverage and social media posts hadn't managed to achieve. People began to understand that this wasn't just about rich people losing expensive things. It was about a fundamental violation of trust and the destruction of irreplaceable family history. She didn't just steal jewelry, Sarah Henderson said in a follow-up interview. She stole pieces of our family stories, she stole memories, and she did it while sitting at our dinner tables and playing with our children. By the end of the week, Vanessa Morrison had become a national symbol of betrayal and criminal entitlement. Her case was being discussed in law schools as an example of how trust can be weaponized. Psychology professors were using her behavior patterns to teach about narcissistic personality disorder and criminal manipulation. The public exposure was complete, and the accountability was just beginning. 2 weeks after Vanessa's arrest, Detective Santos called with news that would change everything we thought we knew about the scope of her criminal operation. Mrs. Chen-Morrison, we need you and your husband to come to the station immediately, she said, her voice tense with urgency. We've uncovered evidence that suggests Mrs. Morrison's criminal activities extend far beyond what we initially discovered. When Marcus and I arrived at the police station, we found Detective Santos waiting with FBI agent Catherine Walsh, a specialist in organized crime and financial fraud. The conference room table was covered with evidence bags, computer printouts, and what appeared to be surveillance photos. Thank you for coming so quickly, Agent Walsh said as we sat down. What I'm about to show you is going to be disturbing, but we need your help to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. She opened a laptop and pulled up what appeared to be a professional database. During our search of Morrison's residence, we discovered several encrypted files on her computer. Our tech team was able to break the encryption yesterday. The screen showed a detailed spreadsheet with hundreds of entries. Each row contained information about different families, names, addresses, net worth estimates, social calendars, and detailed inventories of valuable possessions. This isn't just about your social circle in Connecticut, Agent Walsh explained. Miss Morrison has been systematically targeting wealthy families across multiple states for over 3 years. 3 years? Marcus asked, his voice strained. We thought this started 8 months ago. That's when she began using the Golden State Pawn Shop, Detective Santos clarified. But according to this data, she's been running variations of this operation since 20. Agent Walsh clicked to another screen. She started in Ohio, her home state, targeting families in Columbus and Cleveland. Then she moved to Chicago when David got a job there, and began targeting wealthy families in the suburbs. When you moved to Connecticut, she simply transplanted her operation here. How many victims are we talking about? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Based on the database and corroborating evidence we've found, We estimate at least 47 families across 4 states, Agent Walsh said. Total estimated theft value is approaching $1.2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. $1.2 million. 47 families. This wasn't just a theft ring, it was a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. But how did she sell the items before Connecticut? Marcus asked. If she wasn't using pawnshops, where was the money coming from? Agent Walsh pulled up another file. She was significantly more sophisticated in the early years. In Ohio, she used 3 different alias identities to sell items through high-end consignment shops and estate jewelry dealers. In Chicago, she developed relationships with private collectors who didn't ask too many questions about provenance. Alias identities, I repeated, complete false identities with social security numbers, driver's licenses and credit histories. Agent Walsh confirmed. She used the names Jennifer Walsh, Catherine Stevens, and Maria Rodriguez for different aspects of her operation. Detective Santos opened one of the evidence bags and pulled out a driver's license. This is one of the fake IDs we found hidden in her. The photo is clearly Vanessa Morrison, but the name is Jennifer Walsh. She stole my name, Agent Walsh said grimly, and according to our investigation, she researched FBI agents and other law enforcement personnel to create believable professional backgrounds for her alias. Marcus was staring at the evidence with growing horror. She wasn't just a thief, she was running a professional criminal organization. That's exactly what she was doing, Agent Walsh confirmed. And it gets worse. We believe she was recruiting other women to help with the operation. She pulled up a series of text messages between Vanessa and someone identified as Lisa K. The messages discussed upcoming events and target assessments in language that clearly referred to planned theft. Lisa K. is Lisa Kowalski, a woman Vanessa met at a yoga class in Chicago, Detective Santos explained. She's been arrested and is cooperating with our investigation. According to her statement, Vanessa recruited her by claiming they were running a social media consulting business that required them to attend high-end events and document luxury lifestyles. She convinced other women to help her steal. I asked, incredulous. Lisa thought she was being paid to attend parties and take photos of wealthy families' jewelry for what Vanessa called lifestyle marketing research, Agent Walsh said. She had no idea the information was being used to planned thefts. How many other women were involved? Marcus asked. We've identified at least 6 women across the 3 states who provided various types of assistance, Detective Santos said. Most of them thought they were working for legitimate businesses, event planning, social media marketing, luxury goods consulting. Vanessa was very skilled at creating believable cover stories. Agent Walsh opened another file. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of what we've discovered is the psychological manipulation involved. Vanessa didn't just target random wealthy families. She specifically targeted families going through difficult times, recent divorces, deaths in the family, job losses, medical crises. Why would she target people who were already suffering? I asked. Because they were more vulnerable, Agent Walsh explained. People dealing with major life stresses are less likely to notice missing items immediately, and more likely to assume they misplaced things themselves. They're also more grateful for emotional support, which made them easier for Vanessa to manipulate. She pulled up a file labeled Target Assessment Notes. The entries were chilling in their calculated cruelty. Henderson family. Sarah's father recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Family distracted and emotional. Focus on accessing master bedroom during visit. Martinez family. Recent job loss for husband, Rebecca. Feeling insecure about family finances. Bond over shared financial concerns. Then target during vulnerable moments. Chen family. Recent miscarriage. Jennifer withdrawn and not paying attention to material possession. Opportunity during sympathy visit.
I felt sick reading these entries. Vanessa hadn't just stolen property, she'd weaponized human suffering to make people more vulnerable to her crimes. This explains something that's been bothering me, Marcus said slowly. Over the past year, Vanessa always seemed to know when families in our circle were going through difficulties. She was always the first person to offer help, to volunteer for additional responsibilities at events, to spend extra time with people who were struggling. She was hunting. Detective Santos said bluntly. She was identifying the most vulnerable targets and positioning herself to exploit their pain. Agent Walsh pulled up a series of newspaper obituaries and divorce filings. She monitored local newspapers, court records, and social media to identify families dealing with major life changes. Then she would engineer ways to meet them and insert herself into their lives. The charity work, I realized suddenly. She was always volunteering for charities that dealt with grief counseling, divorce support, cancer patients. She wasn't helping people, she was shopping for victims. Exactly, Agent Walsh confirmed. She used volunteer positions at vulnerable support organizations to identify and access potential targets. It's one of the most calculated and cruel criminal operations I've encountered in 15 years with the FBI. Marcus was reading through more of Vanessa's target assessment note. Look at this entry about the Williams family, he said, his voice shaking with anger. It says mother dying of cancer, family focused on medical care, expensive jewelry, left unattended during hospital visits, high-value targets with minimal security awareness due to emotional distraction. She stole from a family whose mother was dying of cancer, I asked, feeling tears starting to form. Multiple families in similar situations, Agent Walsh confirmed. The pattern is consistent across all 3 states. She specifically targeted people during the worst moments of their lives. Detective Santos opened another evidence bag. We also found detailed financial records showing how she was using the stolen money. She wasn't just funding a lifestyle, she was investing in additional criminal enterprises. What kind of enterprises? Marcus asked. Identity theft, credit card fraud, and what appears to be a pyramid scheme targeting military wives, Agent Walsh said. She was using the jewelry theft money to fund other criminal operations. Military wives, I repeated. Wives of deployed servicemen, Detective Santos explained. She was targeting women whose husbands were overseas, offering them work from home opportunities that were actually designed to steal their personal information and financial data. Marcus put his head in his hands. David's brother-in-law is in the Navy. His wife mentioned that Vanessa had been offering her some kind of business opportunity. We need to contact her immediately, Agent Walsh said. If she's given Vanessa any personal information, she could be at risk for identity theft. As the briefing continued, the scope of Vanessa's criminal empire became increasingly clear. This wasn't a case of a desperate woman making bad decisions. This was a professional criminal who had spent years building a sophisticated operation designed to exploit human vulnerability and trust. The most disturbing part, Agent Walsh said, as we prepared to leave, is that she was getting better at it. Her methods became more sophisticated over time, her target selection more precise, her manipulation tactics more refined. If she hadn't gotten caught in Connecticut, there's no telling how much damage she could have done. What happens now, I asked. Now we work with law enforcement in Ohio, Illinois, and potentially other states to identify all the victims and build cases in multiple jurisdictions, Agent Walsh said. Vanessa Morrison is looking at federal charges that could result in decades in prison. What about all the families she hurt? Marcus asked. That's going to be the hardest part, Detective Santos admitted. Some of the stolen items from the early years of her operation have been sold and can't be recovered. Some families don't even know they were victims yet. We're going to be notifying people that their trust was violated by someone they considered a friend, and telling them that irreplaceable family heirlooms are gone forever. As we left the police station, I felt overwhelmed by the scope of human damage Vanessa had caused. 47 families across 3 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars in theft, countless people who had their trust violated and their most precious possessions stolen during the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Marcus, I said as we drove home, how does someone become that evil? How does someone look at other people's pain and see opportunity? I don't know, Marcus replied. But I know that what she did goes beyond theft. She didn't just steal things, she stole people's ability to trust, their sense of safety, their belief that the world contains good people who want to help during difficult times. The woman I thought I knew as my sister-in-law had never existed. In her place was a professional predator who had spent years perfecting the art of exploiting human kindness and vulnerability for profit. 6 months after Vanessa's arrest, I stood in a federal courthouse in Hartford, holding Marcus's hand as we waited to hear the final sentencing in what had become one of the most extensive theft rings in Connecticut's history. The courtroom was packed with victims from across 3 states, FBI agents, local law enforcement, and media representatives who had been following the case since it broke. Judge Rebecca Morrison, no relation to our family, despite the shared name, had reviewed thousands of pages of evidence, victim impact statements, and psychiatric evaluations over the past month. Today, she would determine how Vanessa would pay for 3 years of calculated cruelty and criminal enterprise. The defendant will rise, Judge Morrison announced. Vanessa stood beside her federal public defender, looking nothing like the polished socialite who had stolen my engagement ring 7 months ago. Prison had aged her dramatically. Her hair was gray at the roots, her expensive clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit, and her once perfect makeup was nowhere to be seen. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. The calculating spark had been replaced by something that looked like genuine fear. Miss Morrison, Judge Morrison began, I have presided over criminal cases for 23 years, and I have rarely encountered a defendant whose crimes demonstrated such calculated cruelty and systematic exploitation of human vulnerability. You didn't just steal property, you weaponized trust, friendship, and human compassion to commit these crimes. The judge consulted her notes. The evidence shows that you specifically targeted families during the most difficult periods of their lives, during deaths, divorces, medical crises, and financial hardship. You used their pain as a roadmap to make them more vulnerable to your criminal activities. Sarah Henderson was sitting 2 rows ahead of me, and I could see her shoulders shaking as Judge Morrison spoke. Sarah had been one of the most articulate voices during the victim impact statements, describing how Vanessa's theft of her grandmother's emerald necklace had robbed her family, not just of a valuable piece of jewelry, but of a tangible connection to their ancestry and history. The court has received 43 victim impact statements, Judge Morrison continued. These statements describe not just financial losses totaling $1.2 million, but the destruction of faith in human kindness, the violation of sacred family relationships, and the loss of irreplaceable family heirlooms that connected families to their history and heritage. She picked up one of the statements. Rebecca Martinez wrote, Vanessa Morrison didn't just steal my anniversary necklace, she stole my ability to trust people who offer help during difficult times. When my husband lost his job, and she offered emotional support, I believed she cared about our family. Instead, she was studying our vulnerabilities to better exploit us. I will never again be able to accept help from friends without wondering about their true motive. Marcus squeezed my hand tighter as Judge Morrison continued reading. Victim statements. Each one described the same devastating impact, not just financial loss, but the destruction of basic trust in human relationships. Margaret Whitman wrote, my mother's sapphire bracelet was the only thing I had left of her after she died of Alzheimer's. Vanessa Morrison attended my mother's funeral, hugged me while I cried, and then stole that bracelet from my home 3 days later while I was still grieving. She didn't just take jewelry. She took my last physical connection to my mother during the worst time of my life. David was sitting in the back of the courtroom with Emma and Sophie, who were now 8 years old and still struggling to understand why their mother was in prison. The twins had been in counseling for months, trying to process the revelation that their mother was a criminal who had used their childhood home to hide stolen property in their toy boxes. The defendant has shown no genuine remorse for her actions, Judge Morrison observed. During sentencing hearings, she has continued to minimize her crimes, blame her victims, and attempt to manipulate this court's perception of her character. Even now, facing the consequences of her choices, she shows no authentic understanding of the harm she has caused. This was true. Throughout the legal proceedings, Vanessa had maintained that she was the real victim of circumstance, of financial pressure, of society's expectations for women in her social position. She had never once acknowledged the specific pain she had caused to individual families, never shown genuine remorse for exploiting people during their most vulnerable moments. Mrs. Morrison, Judge Morrison said, addressing Vanessa directly. Your crimes represent a particularly cruel form of criminal behavior. You didn't steal from strangers or business. You stole from people who welcomed you into their homes, who trusted you with their children, who shared their deepest sorrows and fears with you. You used their trust as a weapon against them. Agent Walsh had told us that Vanessa's case was now being used by the FBI as a training example for identifying sophisticated criminal manipulation tactics. Psychology programs were studying her methods as examples of how narcissistic personality disorder could manifest in criminal behavior. Law enforcement agencies across the country were using her case to train officers in recognizing organized theft rings that exploited personal relationships. The court sentences Vanessa Morrison to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, Judge Morrison announced. Additionally, the defendant is ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims, totaling $1.2 million, plus interest and court costs. A collective exhale went through the courtroom. 25 years. Vanessa would be 68 years old when she was released, and her daughters would be 33 older than Vanessa had been when she started her criminal enterprise. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, upon release, the defendant will serve 5 years of supervised probation with restrictions on her access to social media, volunteer organizations, and social events where she might have access to potential victims' personal property. As court officers prepared to escort Vanessa back to prison, she turned around to look at the courtroom full of people whose lives she had damaged. For just a moment her eyes met mine, and I saw something that might have been recognition of the enormity of what she had done. But then the moment passed, and she was led away to begin serving a sentence that would likely consume the rest of her productive life. Outside the courthouse, the victims gathered to speak with reporters. The coverage had evolved over the months, from sensational headlines about wealthy socialites, to serious journalism, about trust, vulnerability, and the psychological impact of betrayal crimes. Justice was served today, Sarah Henderson told Channel 8 News. But justice doesn't return our stolen property or repair the damage to our ability to trust people. Vanessa Morrison stole more than jewelry. She stole our faith in human goodness during the times when we needed it most. David had declined all media interviews, focusing instead on rebuilding his life and protecting his daughters from the ongoing publicity. He had moved back to Ohio with the twins, taken a new job using his maiden name, and was working with therapists to help Emma and Sophie process their mother's crimes. The girls ask about her sometimes, David had told me privately. They want to know when mommy is coming home. How do you explain to 8-year-olds that their mother is a criminal who used their toy boxes to hide stolen jewelry? Marcus and I had received our engagement ring back months ago, along with several other pieces of my jewelry that Vanessa had stolen over the years, items I hadn't even realized were missing, until police recovered them from her hidden cache. But getting the ring back hadn't felt like the victory I'd expected. It doesn't feel the same, I told Marcus that evening, as we sat in our living room, the ring back in its rightful place on my finger. When I look at it now, I don't just see our love story, I see everything that happened after. Maybe that's not entirely bad, Marcus said thoughtfully. Maybe now it represents something more than just our engagement. Maybe it represents your strength, your willingness to fight for what's right, your refusal to be silenced or manipulated. He was right. The ring had become a symbol of more than just our relationship. It represented the moment I chose to stand up to betrayal, to demand accountability, to refuse to let someone's lies become my reality. 3 months later, we received an unexpected letter. It was from Lisa Kowalski, the woman who had unwittingly helped Vanessa scout targets in Chicago. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, she wrote, I wanted you to know that I've been following the case and the victim impact statement. I had no idea that the social media consulting work I was doing for Vanessa was actually helping her plan thefts. I thought I was helping her build legitimate businesses. The letter continued. I've started a support group for people who were manipulated into helping criminals without realizing it. We call ourselves Unwitting Accomplices, and we work with law enforcement to help them understand how manipulators recruit innocent people to assist with their crime. I hope that sharing our experiences can help prevent other people from being fooled the way I was.
A year after Vanessa's sentencing, Marcus and I attended the wedding of David's college roommate in Chicago. At the reception, a woman approached our table. "Excuse me," she said nervously, "are you the Morrison family from the jewelry theft case?" I tensed, expecting another awkward encounter with someone who recognized us from the news coverage. "I'm Jennifer Chen," she continued. "My family was one of Vanessa's victims in Chicago. I wanted to thank you." "Thank us?" Marcus asked. "For fighting back," Jennifer said. "For pressing charges and seeing it through to conviction. If you had handled it privately or let family pressure convince you to drop the charges, she would still be out there hurting people. My grandmother's jade bracelet was the only thing I had left of her, and I got it back because you refused to let Vanessa get away with what she did." As we flew home to Connecticut that weekend, I reflected on how much our lives had changed since that Christmas morning, when I discovered my engagement ring was missing. The experience had been traumatic and painful, but it had also taught me something valuable about the importance of standing up for truth and justice, even when it's difficult, even when it involves family, even when it would be easier to just let things go. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked as our plane descended toward Bradley International Airport. "Do you ever wish we had handled things differently?" I looked at my engagement ring, catching the light from the airplane window, and thought about all the families who had gotten justice because we chose to fight rather than stay silent. "Never," I said. "Not for a single moment." The ring still represented our love story, but now it also represented something more. The moment we chose truth over comfort, justice over peace, and accountability over family loyalty, and that, I realized, made it even more precious than it had been before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.